Hi Flosstube, I'm Annie and I'm the Proper Stitcher, and welcome to episode 31. This is the third part of a series that I'm doing on the 25th of each month, and this is a Quaker Christmas Stitch Along update. I am co-hosting a stitch along of a Quaker Christmas pattern with Artie the Vintage Stitcher, and I have decided on the 25th of each month I would come to you with an update of not only my progress on a Quaker Christmas, but other stitchers' progress on Instagram and Facebook, and to share with you some history that I have been researching on Quaker Samplers. So I apologize I did not come to you in the month of September. You all know that I had a retreat that I was helping a friend of mine host, so that I traveled for a week. It also required a lot of planning leading up to the retreat. And then I went to Florida to visit my sister. So I missed the month of September, but I am back on track. It is October 25th. This is the third one in this series, and I am excited to share with you what I have learned this month. And I plan to keep these going, these monthly updates going, not only and while I'm stitching a Quaker Christmas, but hopefully after I finish, just depending on what we all decide that is the best course of action to do after I finish a Quaker Christmas. But let's start from the beginning. So for those of you who are new, welcome. And you've stumbled onto probably the middle of a conversation, or you feel like you've walked into a room and missed the beginning of a story. So let me just give you a little brief background of what I'm talking about. I am co-hosting a stitch along with Artie and the Vintage Stitcher, and we are stitching a Quaker Christmas from Bygone Stitches. And this is something we started on June the 1st, but some people are just now starting this month or last month. We had hoped to be finished by the end of November, but that is not going to be the case for a lot of people, myself included. But we are using the hashtag on Instagram, and Artie and I both have our own Facebook pages, and I will link everything below and share those links with you. But we are using the hashtag on Instagram, hashtag Quaker Christmas SAL. You can also post photos of your progress or go and see photos of other people's progress on my Facebook page and on Artie's Facebook page. It's been a fun stitch along. I have seen so many beautiful choices in color, so many different choices of linen and floss, and it's just been a lot of fun seeing the progress that other people have made. Some people have finished, some people have already framed their piece. It's pretty impressive. So I'm just really enjoying this pattern, and that is what prompted me to decide to do research on Quaker Samplers, because I did not know anything about Quaker Samplers. And all I knew is that they had motifs and medallions that were very specific for Quaker Samplers. So I just wanted to dive in a little bit more about what a Quaker Sampler is and the history of the Quaker schools and the Quaker needlework and samplers. So let me show you the progress on my Quaker Christmas sampler. I'm going to show you some patterns that I've purchased that are Quaker style and theme that I hope to start after I finish this piece. And then I'm going to share with you some history that I've researched this month on just very scratch the surface of medallion samplers. So let's get started. So as I said, I am behind on my Quaker Christmas, and that's okay. I'm okay with not being finished in November. I'm okay with it taking me a little bit longer because this is a piece that I really do enjoy stitching. So let me show you my progress. This is how far I've gotten. I started up here in the right-hand corner, and I have made my way all the way down to the bottom. So this is how tall, the height of the sampler. So I am very slow going at this, and it's because I need to have a good lighting in my magnifier to do this. But I just love how there is a nice blend of not only Christmas motifs, but birds and bumblebees and just flowers and just all kinds of medallions in here. This is being stitched on 36 count cream Edinburgh linen. And let me show you the length of it, or the full piece. So this is cream Edinburgh linen. It's a very thin and soft linen. There's no modeling to this linen at all. And I am using the called for Classic Colorworks colors. And those are Balsam Fir, Ye Olde Gold, and Cupid. And so let me show you what those look like against this linen. So as you can see, just very traditional Christmas colors, and they are going to be, it's monochromatic, mostly all in the Balsam Fir with just a few pops of the red and gold. Artie has decided to not add those, the words Merry Christmas, and she put her wedding date here to keep hers out year round. I'm stitching mine completely Christmas themed. I'm keeping Merry Christmas. I'm stitching it as is. And a lot of ideas, I haven't seen anyone do this yet. I might do this when I'm finished or as I move along. I think it would be wonderful to take out a few medallions and make just individual ornaments to put on a tree and make like a Quaker Christmas tree. But I am really enjoying this stitch. Like I said, I'm using 1 strand of floss over 2 strands on the linen. And it just gives it such a nice, clean look. I do use a bigger hoop on this one. And that's just keeps me from having to move my linen and the hoop around. And so I get a little bit more progress done. So that's helped me a lot with stitching this piece. I keep everything in the same bag so I can just grab it and go, or at night or in the day when I am stitching this piece. I have everything together. So I picked up a couple of other Quaker inspired samplers, or small, very small pieces that I am excited to get started stitching. These are not holiday and themed, so I really could start them and not wait until I'm finished with a Quaker Christmas. But this is Threadwork Primitives Quaker Friends, and that's the way the photo is. I'm going to turn it this way so you can see it. And I love the simplicity and the small size of this. I saw this at, I purchased this at the Finishing Touch in Louisville, Kentucky. And they stitched it with the called for floss, which is Wood Trail. I decided to go with blue because blue is my favorite color. And I am not sure which blue, but I'm gonna do one of these blues, either the dark blue or the lighter blue. But these are MPI silks, and the light blue is number 742. The dark blue is 746. So that is one Quaker inspired piece that I picked up. That is from Threadwork Primitives. The other two are from Brenda Gervais, and this is A Token of Love. And A Token of Love, let me show this to you first. So these are the medallions that you would see in a Quaker sampler, and how they go all the way up to the border in a half medallion. And a token of love, or it was often a saying or something you would see on a pin ball or a pin cushion that the girls would give as gifts to their friends. And so that is a common phrase that you would see in a Quaker sampler. So this one is called Token of Love by Brenda Gervais. And again, mostly blues, my favorite. So that is going to be a beautiful piece. And then another one from Brenda Gervais is Where the Bittersweet Blooms. This is a fall piece. And you can see how she took those half medallions up to the border. And that's where the Quaker inspiration is in this one, and the little stars. So those are sweet designs I picked up this last month, over the last 2 months, to add to my, not only my cross stitch collection, but to kind of keep my Quaker interest and enthusiast going. So let's jump into the history that I have done this month on Quaker Samplers. And And I have taken a lot of notes. I will reference my notes because it's a lot of information. It's not firsthand for me. This is not something that I can just memorize because it's still very new to me. I am not a historian. I am not an expert on Quaker Samplers, but I have purchased some books. I've been reading quite a bit about them, and it's really hard for me to know how much is going to be too much information to give at one time, you know, because I'm wanting this to be fun and lighthearted and easy to follow. And so I'm going to keep it simple as I can. We're just doing small chunks each month. And what we're doing this month is I am going to just scratch the surface, give you a little bit of a beginning information on the Medallion samplers, because there's, out of all of the samplers, that is the category that has the most information. So I wanted to start with the Medallion samplers for you all because they're what we all recognize as Quaker Samplers. In my past two videos on Quaker Samplers, I told you the different types of Quaker Samplers. There's a darning sampler, a marking sampler, and the other one's drawing a blank. So medallion, darning, marker, and it'll come to me in just a second. It'll probably come to me in just a second. So there are 4 types of samplers that they stitched or made, and the medallion sampler is the one that we recognize the most. So let's just get right in. I do have some giveaways at the end of the video. I have some giveaways from the last time to go over with you, and that's about it. I'll probably also have to use my glasses when I go over some of this information. So I am using, for this video, I am using my new book that I told y'all about, that I think last month, or in August when I filmed, I had just gotten word that I had acquired this book that is out of print and very hard to find. This is Carol Humphrey's book called Quaker Schoolgirl Samplers from Ackworth. And this is, like I said, an out-of-print book, very hard to find. And I was fortunate enough to find it for a very reasonable price. And I was so excited to get it in the mail. So I am still making my way through this book. I also have a stack of other books that I have been using. But for this episode, I used this book only. So let's jump right in. Okay, so Quaker Samplers are Carol Humphrey mentions that it is very difficult to research Quaker Samplers because there's very little history or written history or archives in the library or on the school girls' side of the school, meaning they did not keep very good records of the girls' activities at the school. So any information that has been discovered or found on Quaker Samplers or Quaker Girls School is usually just through random information. It's usually unconnected, or they just found it through lucky circumstances or coincidences, meaning lots of research went into not only the genealogy of the students, cross-referencing initials to students that were registered, friends, known friends initials that were on samplers. So a lot of, I guess, backdoor detective work was being done or has been done for research purposes on Quaker schoolgirls and their day-to-day chores, their day-to-day activities, and their artwork or their craft that they were doing or their needlework. So through Carol Humphrey's finds, she used records that were links in marriages, links in friendships, and links in faith. So through all of those diggings and through all of the I can't imagine the amounts of paperwork that she went through to do her research. It just was a lot of cross-referencing. So she writes in her book that Henry Thompson, who was a Quaker historian 100 years after the Quaker schools were opened. So in 1879, he writes in a history of the first 100 years of the school. He even writes in his book His book was called A History of the Ackworth School during its first 100 years. That was the name of his book. He writes, little is recorded of the doings on girls' side of the house. So little is recording on the doings of the girls' side of the house. He also writes, so little written history pertains to the girls' department. And no one knows why. No one knows if it was misplaced. No one knows if they didn't have anyone to keep records or to keep information. But even in 1879, it was noted that so little was known or kept about the girls' side of the school. He also, in addition to saying that, he says there's extensive archives on the boys' side. So that is one of the many reasons I'm sure we do not have a lot of information on the girls' side of the school, on Quaker Samplers, anything that pertains to the girls. So when you think about a young girl who is learning to do needlework, she more than likely would have been at the age of 5 or 6 when she first picked up a needle in her hand. And the reason we think that, or it is thought that, is because at the age of 5 or 6, you have a little bit more patience, you're a little bit more mature, and you have better hand-eye coordination. So it is assumed that by the age 5 or 6, most girls who were in a household, lived in a household, that is when they were introduced to needlework. At the Ackworth school, the youngest that you could be to attend the Ackworth school was age 9. And it was expected that you would be there a minimum 1 year with a maximum of 3 years. The oldest you could be when you arrived at the Ackworth school was 13. So when a lot of these girls that arrived at age 9, we have some examples of their work, and their work is very exquisite, much more advanced than what you would think a 9-year-old would be. But if you consider the fact that they started when they were 5 or 6, and this is what they did in their leisure time, or this gave them several years to perfect, or at least get the elementary foundation and groundwork of proper needlework and embroidery. So by the time they arrived at the Ackworth school, they were already pretty advanced for what you would consider to be a student. So this was not going to be their first time that they held a needle in their hand, was when they arrived at the Ackworth school. So this is one description, and I want to give you a mental image of what it looked like, a Quaker schoolgirl looked like. And I'm going to read to you what a description in Carol Humphrey's book on what a schoolgirl looked like. So, and these are the words of Thomas Humphrey, who was the superintendent in 1834. So this is how he describes the girls. The girls figured in white caps, the hair turned back over them or combed straight down on the forehead, checked aprons with bibs and white neck handkerchiefs folded neatly over their stuff gowns in front. Their walking costume was a kind of hat, the pattern of which we are unable to indicate, and a long cloth cloak with colored mitts reaching to their elbows. That was how they looked. I'm going to put an image of them, of an etching that I found of them, of an image of a schoolgirl here. Here is a list of what their uniform was. When they arrived, this was what they were expected to bring. Each girl was allowed one hat, one cloak, not made of silk, one pair of stays, one pocket, 2 caps, 2 pocket dittos, I don't know what that is, 2 pairs of stockings, 2 pairs of shoes, 1 pair of mitts, 2 stuffed gowns, 2 petticoats, 2 under ditto, 3 shifts, I'm not saying ditto right, it's probably something else, 3 shifts, 2 check aprons and bibs, 1 white apron, 3 tuckers, and 2 neck handkerchiefs. So very specific. It was also noted that if the girl came from an underprivileged home and could not provide all of those items for herself, the school would supplement and provide some items for her. The girls had very domestic chores. And as far as sewing chores would go, they were skilled in spinning, knitting, and sewing. So the spinning would come in when the Ackworth school, the original Ackworth school, or Quaker school, was a hospital, or was purchased. The building was a hospital, and they turned it into the school. But the spinning, you would imagine that would be to make blankets or sheets or larger pieces. So they were skilled in spinning. Knitting was a very big part of their day-to-day chores. Knitting clothing, socks, mitts, things of that nature. And then sewing. So the sewing would be the mending of the shirts, the mending of pants. That's where the darning samplers would come in. All of this, I promise, I'm getting to the medallion samplers, but I just wanted to give you just a little brief image of what these Quaker girls did and looked like. So the making of the samplers was never mentioned by Henry Thompson. He never mentioned in his first 100 years of Quaker history, first 100 years of Ackworth school history, never mentioned their samplers, never mentioned their embroidery work, never mentioned darning samplers, nothing to that nature, never mentioned their needlework. He only referenced their spinning, knitting, sewing, which is very interesting because we know they did the samplers. We know because they're dated, we see them, but he never mentioned that in his book. Just an interesting tidbit for me. But we do know that they spent most of their time out of those three sewing categories. The majority of their time was spent knitting. And the reason that's important, we'll talk about here in a few minutes. So now we're going into the medallion samplers. Trying to understand how medallion samplers began is especially difficult because medallion samplers are unlike the Quaker way of life. They are elaborate, little exquisite use of materials, very intricate, and Quakers are usually more simple in nature. Just their clothing, their style, their materials are a little bit more simplistic in nature. Quaker medallion samplers are a little bit more elaborate. So how they went from being this simply stated to a little bit more elaborate is a big mystery for the medallion samplers and the Quaker lifestyle. They did, all the medallion samplers do vary in style, they vary in theme, but they vary in theme, they vary in color, they vary in, but they all have the same style. You know, the border medallions reaching all the way up to the border. They use the half medallions, whole medallions, the flowers, the birds, the animals. Oftentimes flower, birds, and animals were encompassed inside of a medallion. But the medallion samplers only span about 35 years during the Quaker history. So from about 1790 to the 1820s is where we have the most of those samplers remaining that we know of, that are either in private collection or in museums. It is safe to assume, and again, Carol Humphrey mentions this, that a lot of the things that we know are we have to just assume a lot of these things took place. So the decorative styles of these samplers are similar to English and European samplers. And I'm going to put some images up throughout here as we're talking about these pieces. The earliest known Quaker medallion sampler is from Mary Wingham's sampler of 1790, and we talked about this one last time. I'm going to put in an image here. Mary Wingham was at the Ackworth School from 1788 to 1791. Hers is a beautiful example of a medallion sampler. So we have to, as I mentioned, assume that they had, meaning the school, they had visitors, they had access to books, they had access to pattern books. People who would come and stay at the school were from other parts of England and Europe. So the big question is where the influence came for these samplers. So there are some samplers that that they would have had access to through books, that we would think that they would have access through in books. The German samplers are very similar in that they have floral bands and geometric patterns. I'm going to put an image here. I'm going to pull up my image to reference. What we'll notice in this pattern, this is a 1807 German sampler. It's called the Vierlande sampler, and it's a German sampler. You can see the monochromatic style. You can see the use of the flowers, the medallions, although they are not octagonal and they do not go up to the border and half medallions, but they are there. They are medallions. They even include birds. I see a rooster. I see a peacock. Oddly enough, there's a chair, more birds and little flowers. So that is an example of a European sampler. They also would have had access to printing and books for reference, because, you know, they would have had that, and we do not know what they had in their library. They did not have detailed records of their library until the end of the 1800s. The Quaker samplers the girls created were adapted patterns and motif that we think were derived from European embroidery. But the Quaker girls put their own spin on it, and they put their own stamp on it. That's where the half of medallions come from, the more simplistic medallions. Even though this German sampler, those medallions are very intricate, and the Quaker medallion samplers are a lot more simple. Perhaps that's where the Quaker influence is a little bit more simple in nature. Now, I'm also going to put up here a detail of a black sampler, which is dated 1859, and it shows typical motifs. This is from the Netherlands. That use of the fruits and the basket of flowers and the birds and the star we see in the Quaker samplers as well. So we don't know if the Quaker samplers influenced some of these designs or if these designs influenced the Quaker samplers. So when you think of, they could have had access to books, they would have had access to patterns, and they would have had access to, as the school went on, they had more affluent students arriving. So you had more girls from wealthy families who would have had access to exposure to finer embroidery, finer silks, and they could have brought these influences with them and taught the girls different ways. And just like we do when we're together with our stitching friends, we share things we learn and we know, and perhaps influence from each other helped with that. But there is no evidence of a teacher influencing this style, and there's no evidence of visitors or travelers. We can just only assume for the girls. So times were changing at the school. So as I mentioned, more affluent students were arriving. We do know, as I mentioned earlier, knitting was very, very dominant in their day-to-day chore. That was more as a, the knitting became more of just what they needed to do I'm losing my words. The knitting was needed for their, okay, I was able to gather my words. So their knitting was more functional. They used it for, like I said, clothing, socks, mending, sweaters, things of that nature. So another way that they use their knitting is the girls made pincushions, and they're pinball pincushions. And I'm going to insert some images as I talk about these. The oldest pinball dates back to 1709, and what these were used for is they were worn on their apron belt, and they kept their pins in there. So they were basically like a tomato pincushion on your hip at all times. So this is a pinball pincushion, and they used these as gifts. They made these to sell. But what's interesting is these pinballs predate Quaker Samplers. So if you look at these images and motifs on these pinballs, they are very similar to Quaker Medallion samplers. So you have the flowers, you have the motif bordering up to the edge, so giving it half of that motif up to the edge. But the oldest pinball being 1709. So one theory is these two crafts, knitting and needlework or embroidery or cross stitch, blended together. So you've got the knitting medallions that they knitted on these pinballs, and then you have where they took simple samplers and made them a little bit more extravagant by using these medallions or these motifs from these pinballs. So there are pattern books from Ossenberg dated 1974, and that's where I was talking about some of the patterns that they would have had access to, and I'm going to insert those here. These patterns have floral sprigs, they have border patterns, octagonal motifs, and very other so on of these motifs that we are used to seeing in these patterns, but they would have had access to these potentially as well. So same decorative tradition, just the pinballs were used as more of a just a functional purpose of their day-to-day chores. The medallions are not uniform. There are 3 types of medallions or categories of medallions, and this is where the evolution of the medallions are coming in. So you have polychrome silk, you have monochrome brown or black silk, and then you have dullish green. This was what was started easing into the colors of that the girls were using. What I'm going to do is we're going to pause here for today, because that is just the early beginning intro to Medallion samplers. We have over the next probably do it all in the next series, but we will go into early Medallion sampler examples of those and later Medallion samplers and give you examples of those. So as you can see, just scratching the surface on these Medallion samplers. And I find it very interesting. There's so much we do not know about them. But I am enjoying learning more and more about them. So let's go over our giveaways from last time. So I had 3 giveaways for you. The first one was this Leisure Arts publication book. This is Merry Christmas ABC. This goes to Gail Firens. Gail, I'm so sorry. It's Firenze. You're the winner of book number 1. Number 2 is the Lucinda A. Frazier, 1866, a sample, an Iowa Quaker sampler. This goes to Bridget Harrison. And number 3 is Bird Songs by Samplers Not Forgotten. This goes to Nancy Evans. So ladies, if you could email me at theproperstitcher@gmail.com, I'll get those in the mail to you. You have until next month on November 25th. So I do have giveaways for today. And to be entered for a giveaway, like the video, subscribe to my channel, and answer the question below, and tell me what number you would like to be entered to win. You're welcome to enter for all 5. I have 5 giveaways. So the question I want you to answer is, when I think about the lack of written history on Medallion samplers, or excuse me, any Quaker sampler, and when I think about how there's just no records, it just makes me wonder about the things we stitch and we hand down to our family. And how do you feel about that? Do you mark your work when you cross stitch? Do you put your initials or your date, or do you leave a little note on the back of a frame or a journal of what you're stitching? I am bad about that. I need to get in a better habit of keeping better records. And after reading the words from the historian that there were no records of any of the girls' doings of the school's department, it's very sad to me that there's a whole section of history and something very valuable that we don't know about. So and it's really not that long ago when you think about it, how we know a lot of history about older works and older time periods, but for some reason, not for the Quaker Ackworth schoolgirls. So answer that question if that makes sense. Do you mark your work or leave some sort of record for other people to know about what you've done? So here are the 5 giveaways. Number 1, JBW's Peace on Earth. Number 2 is Country Cottage Needleworks Christmas Cookies. Number 3 is Homespun Elegance Peace on Earth. Number 4 is Homespun Elegance Sampler Ornament. And number 5 is a scissor fob that I made, and this is pink with a little bird. So if you are following or would like to follow the Quaker Christmas stitch along, either if you'd like to stitch it with us, join in at any time. If you'd like to see the progress, you can use on Instagram, hashtag Quaker Christmas SAL, or if you're stitching it, use that hashtag, or join my Facebook page or Artie's Facebook page, and you can see our progress on there. And you can also have a blog. I have theproperstitcher.com, and of course on my YouTube channel. Every week I come to you on Thursdays. So until then, thank you so much for coming back, and I will see you on this Thursday for my regular video. Thanks.